There we go. Very good. And welcome everybody to Classics 160B1. You know it. You love it. It's Meet the Ancients. I, of course, am your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen. And today, we are in a very weird spot, right? We left off last week with Rome kicking butt in the Punic Wars. They are flying high. They are at the peak of their kind of expansion and power and success. And today we're going to continue that story of expansion and power and success. But we're going to start to see little cracks in the structure where things haven't really gone wrong yet, but we're going to start to see some things that might go wrong in the future. And we'll see how these little tiny kind of issues might explode moving forward. So let's go ahead and bring down the projector, turn down the lights, fire this thing up for lecture 11.1, The Beginning of the End. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with some announcements today. We're going to recap the Punic Wars, again, Rome's conflict with the mighty city of Carthage. And then we're going to talk about Roman imperialism in the 2nd century, right? So kind of outside of the Punic Wars, how does Rome go from this regional peninsular power to taking over the entire Mediterranean? That's our story for today. And then finally, we're going to conclude with the story of two brothers, the Gracchi. And the Gracchi are two tribunes of the Plebs. And they come up with this very interesting new strategy. A strategy that takes the kind of people lower on the socioeconomic and sociopolitical spectrum and realizes that there is a wealth of power in cultivating those people. So that is our plan for today. Let's go ahead and see what announcements we have. Same as last time. All right, put this thing into speaker view. You can see me. You can see the announcements. You can see the fact that you get extra credit if you take your revised research proposal over to the Think Tank Writing Center or the Writing Skills Improvement Program. Just go ahead and forward the confirmation email on that or the finishing email, whatever you guys get afterwards. Forward that to your TA and they'll keep track of that and you'll get a half grade bump on your final revised research proposal. Other announcements, very important here. Let's see what else we got. Let's see. If you guys haven't seen it, we have got the women's basketball team playing to go to the right to go to the Final Four later today. So go ahead and clear your afternoon or early evening schedule at 6 p.m. on ESPN. The women Wildcats are going to be playing the Indiana Hoosiers again for the right to go to the Final Four. They've been having an awesome tournament so far, so definitely go check that out. And if you've been watching the men's tournament at all, Michigan's playing for the right to go to the Final Four tomorrow at night. So a lot of good basketball to be watched over the next couple of days. All right, I think that covers it for announcements. Very good, very good. Any other announcements? Zach, who are you going to be rooting for here? Can't talk to a TA like that, Noel. Yes, let's hope for what Harry's saying, although I wouldn't mind if Gonzaga got kicked out. They look really, really good. My brackets are terrible. I like watching college basketball a lot, and my bracket's in like the 36th percentile. It is not impressive. Anyway, let's go ahead. We've got half of the Punic War here. Let's finish this. Recapping the Punic Wars. All right, so last time we went through the 3 different Punic Wars, right, that took Rome from this kind of power within Italy to a power within the Mediterranean. And the first of those wars, the First Punic War, started in the very same year that Rome ended up defeating the last of the Etruscan holdouts. So 264 BCE, Rome both defeats the Etruscans at the site of Volsini, which is modern Orvieto, and they become embroiled in the First Punic War with Carthage. And we saw the kind of instigating event of this is this set of mercenaries takes over this city right here, right? Messina or Messana. And then the mercenaries are besieged and they write to both Rome and Carthage asking for help. And both of them show up. And that erupts into a 23-year-long war between those two powers. And remember, we saw last Friday that one of the kind of cool ways or cool inventions that Rome comes up with in order to win this war against Carthage is the corvus, right? Or the crow's beak, which are these long planks with a giant spike on the end. And their strategy was to try to turn naval warfare, which Carthage was really, 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 really good at, into a land battle at sea. So instead of ramming ships, they'd pull up beside them, drop the corvus, and then, like Pirates of the Caribbean style, right, run across the little plank there onto the enemy ship, and then they're really good in land battle. So they win the First Punic War, and at the end of that, right, after the First Punic War, we have got Rome taking not only the Italian peninsula, but also the island of Sicily, right? So when you hear First Punic War, you're like, haha, that's when Rome got its first province, the island of Sicily. I don't know if you say it like that, but that's one way to say it. So, Second Punic War, this is the one with good old Hannibal, right? So Hannibal was the grandson of one of the generals in the First Punic War, one of the Carthaginian generals. He swore at a young, early age to do whatever it takes to bring down the Roman Empire. And that all comes almost to fruition in the Second Punic War as he leads his army, along with a bunch of war elephants, through the Alps and into Italy. And Hannibal is incredibly smart when it comes to battle tactics, and he's incredibly successful for several different battles. So he wins up here at Trebia, he wins down here at Lake Trasimene, right? Remember, that's the one where he kind of has the people hiding in the hills, and the Romans walk along the path next to the lake, and then he has them descend from the hills and push the Romans into the lake. And then the big one is the Battle of Cannae. So this is Rome's worst defeat ever. And he uses this classic pincer move where the Carthaginians, in blue here, right, keep giving ground in the middle, right? As though they're being defeated, they're intentionally falling backwards. And they do so to the point where this kind of shape inverts, right? And so now you've got it kind of this U-shaped thing. The soldiers then stiffen. Rome has to commit more soldiers to continuing to push them back, and that's when the Carthaginian flanks close around the Roman army. And the Roman historians write that it took 8 hours for the Carthaginians to finish the massacre, right? Just going through the process of chopping down all the Romans. And it's something like 70 or 80,000 Romans who end up dying at Cannae. And again, some historians have suggested that if Hannibal really did take the momentum there and march on the city of Rome, there's a possibility that he could have been successful in that. But instead, he kind of stays in the southern part of Italy and he marches around and he's trying to get all these different city-states, right? All the different cities of southern Italy to flip allegiance from Rome to Carthage. And that sounds kind of crazy because, because Rome wins in the end. But you got to remember that it's not like these cities have been loyal to Rome for that long, right? It was relatively recently that Rome took over a lot of those cities. And it would be completely natural to be excited about the possibility of not having to pay tribute or be under the shield of Rome anymore. Now, what ends up happening there is that one of Rome's new generals, this guy Lucius Cornelius Scipio, ends up thinking, hey, while Hannibal's doing that, why don't we take the fight to him? Instead of being defensive, let's play a little offense. And he fights first in Spain and then heads straight to Africa, right? Right outside of Carthage, wins a few battles, and Hannibal's got to get on a ship and hustle back to put up a defense of the city of Carthage. And it's at the Battle of Zama in 202 where the big battle between Hannibal and Scipio comes to a head. Scipio comes up with this plan, using the new kind of very flexible Roman legions to be able to split apart at the exact right time and allow Hannibal's war elephants to just jump through, right? Just kind of run through these open areas. And you can see the illustration here so that they actually don't kill any of the Romans. And the historians say that these war elephants ended up killing just as many of the Carthaginians in that battle as they did Roman soldiers. And so Scipio's able to win that battle, but Carthage doesn't end up being totally destroyed. Hannibal kind of stays on as an administrator, and he's actually incredibly effective at paying off Carthage's debt to Rome and rebuilding the economy, that sort of thing. And it's to the point where Rome starts to get a little scared once again. So after the Second Punic War, right, not only do we have the Italian peninsula and Sicily, we've now also got Sardinia and Corsica and quite a bit of Spain over here. But Carthage is still very much a thing, right? Carthage is still quite powerful here. All right, that's a slide from a long previous lecture. Don't know what it's doing here. Don't worry about it. There we go. That's the slide I'm looking for. Okay, excellent. So there's this guy Cato, and we're going to hear about Cato the Elder later in the lecture too. But he goes as an envoy to Carthage in the 2nd century BC, and he kind of sees them rebuilding, right? And he gets a little scared. And what he ends up doing is every speech he makes in the Senate, he always ends his speech with Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. And eventually he gets the Senate on his side. And they use this little kind of grievance, the fact that Carthage messed with one of Rome's allies, Massinissa of the Numidians, and they use that as an excuse to attack Carthage a third time. And whereas Punic War number 1 and Punic War number 2, those battles, for reals, could have gone either direction, Punic War number 3 is kind of a massacre, right? Rome makes all these crazy demands: hand over hostages, put down your weapons, give us all your weapons and armor, move the city. And except for moving the city, Carthage does basically all of it. And then after Rome's taken all their weapons and armor and hostages, then they attack, which is, I don't know. Maybe there are no rules in war, but it seems like that's kind of not a very nice move. So they destroy the city, and afterwards, right, it's said that they salt the earth so nothing there will ever grow again. And we'll actually see later today that within a couple decades after destroying the city and salting the earth so nothing ever grows there again, the Romans start thinking oh, actually, that's a really awesome place to have a city. It's very strategic. And so all the Romans want to build stuff there again. But we'll see that when we get to the Gracchi. Okay. So they salt the earth. And after the Third Punic War, right, this is what we're looking at. Rome starts out with the Italian peninsula. After Punic War number 1, they get Sicily, and then just a bit later, they get Sardinia and Corsica. After Punic War number 2, they end up getting quite a bit of Spain. After Punic War number 3, they make Africa down here in an actual province. So Rome is by far now the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean, right? And they've done that through these Punic Wars. But you might be thinking, aha, 2nd century BCE, I remember the first half of this class. There are still mighty and powerful Hellenistic kingdoms over here in the east, right? What about the Ptolemies and the Seleucids? Well, that's what we're going to talk about right now. So let's talk a little bit about Roman imperialism. We touched on this last time, right? About how empire kind of sort of means two different things, right? So one definition might be this: a collection of separate or dependent territories subject to officials regularly appointed by a dominant external power to exercise supreme military and judicial authority over them. You don't need to remember that word for word, right? But get the general idea that one way to define an empire is a collection of territories ruled by an external power and kind of subject to them either economically or militarily or politically or legally, that sort of thing. And by that definition, Rome is absolutely an empire now, right? It's got a bunch of different territories that are dependent on it that it rules over politically and militarily, right? So in the 2nd century BC, Rome is an empire for sure, even though we don't really call it the Roman Empire yet. We still call it the Roman Republic because politically, it's still a republic. Now, where we get the word Roman Empire is from this Latin word imperium. And what this means, the way we translate this, imperium in ancient Rome is a magistrate's power to exercise supreme military and judicial authority and to enforce obedience, right? So when you became consul or praetor, you got imperium, meaning like by getting that office, you got imperium to lead the Roman army. And then what we see is as Rome expands, there are people outside of Italy itself who end up getting imperium to be able to command armies in different regions. And the other kind of interesting term we want to take a look at here is provincia or provincia, right? This is where we get our word province. And originally, when you translate this from the Latin, what this ends up meaning is that it's a task giving to somebody, right? So you would give a consul the provincia of going to attack some foreign army. Now later on, as Rome grows, what this kind of evolves into is general regions, right, or provinces that become kind of borderized and established, and then somebody would be appointed a proconsul or a propraetor in charge of those provinces where they would have command of that area and the armies within that area. Okay, so those are just some definitions to start with as we start to think about empire and what it means in Rome's expansion. And again, one of the takeaway points is that by this definition, Rome's totally an empire now, even though historians call this period the Roman Republic because that's the political form at this time. Okay, so we've been talking about the past few classes, what's going on over here on this part of the map in the West. And what we want to talk about now is what's going on in the East. And you just have to think back a couple of weeks. This is exactly what we're talking about. You remember what's going on. This is a map around, what's the date there? Okay, around 200. This is our map. You'll recognize kind of the extent of this as Alexander's empire here, right? And his successors broke it apart, and they're all ruling their different regions. So we've got Ptolemy down here in Egypt, and Ptolemy's expanding. He's got Cyprus now, and he's even got little strongholds in southern Anatolia. We've got Seleucus over here in the Near East, right, in Mesopotamia. We've got Cassander over here. We've got Lysimachus over here. Later, these are going to be the Attalids in Pergamon. We've still got some Greek city-states over here. So we've still got this region totally fragmented, right? And these kingdoms are pretty strong. They've got good armies. They've been around now for 120 years or so, right? So they've got some kind of historical legitimacy, but they've never been able to reunite what Alexander had built. So let's see what Rome does with these successor kingdoms, with these Hellenistic kingdoms. Now, as we go through this, there's going to be some battle names. You don't need to remember each battle name. I'm not going to test you on the battle names. But what I do want you to be able to kind of get a sense for is the timeline, right? The general timeline for when this happens, mainly during the 2nd century BCE. And then also, for almost militarily what what's going on here, right? We're taking the Greek phalanxes that had been so powerful and dominant, like from long before Alexander, right? But Alexander's using those in his giant conquest of all this territory. And we're putting those up against the Roman legions, which were just shown to be very, very effective against Carthage, right? So it's Roman legion versus Greek phalanx coming head to head. So the first area we're going to look at is the region of Macedon, right? So this region up here. And over the course of like 70 years, we get a series of Macedonian wars. So it's 4 different wars. You don't need to remember each set of wars. But it all begins with this guy over here, this guy Philip V. And it begins for 2 reasons. One is that he's messing with Roman trade, right? He's like kind of sending out different raiding parties, taking over ships, blocking ports, doing things that are very problematic for people financially, right? So that's part of it. The second thing in these wars is, especially for the ones after the Second Punic War, right? After 202, with the Battle of Zama, Roman elites and Roman consuls and Roman generals have started to like see how prestigious like things can get when you're successful militarily. We had that guy Scipio, like he got this awesome triumph. He gets a whole new name added to him, right? He becomes Scipio. He earns the name Africanus, right? Scipio, the conqueror of Africa. And these generals are looking at this like, I want me some of that, right? And let's keep fighting so that we can build prestige for ourselves. So this is something that like explicitly Roman historians highlight as like a reason for wanting to do this. And so we get the Battle of Cynocephaly in 197. This is one of the first ones where Roman legions go up against Greek phalanxes. And Titus Flaminius famously defeats Philip V. And this is the first time it's shown that those Roman legions are superior. And about 30 years later, we get the Battle of Pydna. Here, Lucius Aemilius Paulus defeats the Macedonian leader Perseus. Once again, the legion has defeated the phalanx. And this is really Rome taking over Greece. And then it's really this kind of massacre after the Battle of Corinth in 146, where all the Greek city-states are basically coming under Roman power after this kind of Battle of Corinth here. So the Romans win decisively over the course from like, the early the late 3rd century, the 200s, to 146. And you'll notice this is the same year that Rome actually defeats Carthage in the Third Punic War. So at this point, they make Macedon a province of the Roman Empire. 146, they have got an official Roman province in the region of Greece. Next up, they are going to turn their sights towards the Seleucids, right? And so we were just right over here, okay? And that kind of makes sense, right? That's like pretty close to Italy. We're getting pretty far east now, all right? We're getting pretty far east with the Seleucids. But Rome's able to win once again. We've got a descendant of Scipio, a new Scipio, right? And this time, after the Battle of Magnesia, and he defeats Antiochus III there, he adds a new name to himself. He's like, I like what that guy Africanus did. I just won this battle out in what the Romans called Asia. I'm going to call myself Scipio Asiaticus, right? So he conquers the Seleucids, but they're not ready to really bring this area into Roman power. They recognize that this is like a little bit too far away from Rome to effectively rule. And so they kind of put up client kings and they make alliances, but they don't really take it over. They start putting some Greek city-states into their place. So the island of Rhodes, fabulously wealthy because of trade, starts trying to broker deals between the East and Rome. And Rome just doesn't like that Rhodes is trying to exert any authority at all. So they open this like booming port right next to it, and Rhodes kind of crumples down in importance because of Rome's growing economic power in the region. All right, so we've talked a little bit about Macedon. We've talked about the Seleucids and how Rome defeats them in battle, but doesn't quite bring them totally into the empire. Now we're looking at Pergamon, which is a little city-state out here. It's ruled by a group of people known as the Attalids. That's a region of Pergamon there. If you ever go to Turkey, you have to go to Pergamon. It has got one of the coolest theaters ever, right? This is quite high up on the hillside over here. And when you're, sitting at the top of this theater, you are just looking over a massive plain kind of spread out before you, and just very, very cool in terms of the situation of the archaeological site there. And Pergamon, they don't even have to fight. The last of the Attalids, this guy Attalus III, he doesn't even want to be a Hellenistic king. The guy wants to be like a historian and a scholar. And so he basically writes his will and says, hey, when I die, Rome, you can just have my kingdom, right? So Rome gets that one kind of for free. So over the course of that time, right, over the 2nd century, Rome is relatively successful in terms of taking some of these Hellenistic kingdoms and bringing them under Roman power. And they do so in different ways, right? Sometimes it's winning in battle and making them a province. Sometimes it's winning in battle, like against the Seleucids, but setting up client kings that are technically independent but allied to Rome. And sometimes they're just given the area when people die. That's the easiest way. Now, we're going to shift our sights back to the West now. And what's going on in the West is kind of sort of completely different. All right? So think back to those battles against the Macedonians, right? Like the Battle of Cynocephaly and Pydna and Corinth. These were massive battles between Roman legions and Greek phalanxes, right? And if you win one of those massive battles, it's a huge blow to the entire region and ruling power there. This is like what's going on up in northern Italy at the time, right? The area that's not quite conquered yet. It's full of Celts. But the Celts aren't the same as like the Macedonians. There's not like one Celtic country, right? Or like one Celtic empire that has its own army. You've got all these things, the Taurians and the Insubres and the Canomans and the Lingons and the Boeans and the Venetes and the Carnes and the Communes and the Retes. Like, these are all different little tribes. They are kind of ethnically Celtic, but they're all very, very different. And when you look at other areas of the West as well, like when we get into Spain, it's the same thing. You've got all sorts of little tribes. And this gets very difficult, right? So Rome starts going up there and they start picking fights with some of these. They're very effective against the Ligurians. They defeat them in battle and move them south. But they're never able to really do much beyond this kind of region right here, right? You can kind of see the Alps in the topography. They're somewhat effective against the groups on this side of the Alps, but nothing much in the Alps and beyond. In Spain, we get a similar situation. So here's a good map of a bunch of the different tribes in Spain at the time, right? And the problem is, like, when you go to fight the Macedonians, they show up with their phalanx, right? If you're Rome and you go to fight, like, all these tribes in Spain, there's nobody to fight. You get there, and it's just like people hiding in the mountains. And what are you supposed to do, right? Like, march your, like, Roman, like, legions, like, up a mountain and trying to look for, like, little pockets of people? And so, even though they're less organized, and they have kind of not as effective weapons, and they're smaller in terms of population, Rome runs into a ton of problems dealing with like the less politically sophisticated tribes of Spain and northern Italy than they do fighting the kind of kingdoms and empires of the East, right, of the Greek East. And that's also because every little battle Rome wins, right? If they beat the Greeks or the Macedonians, boom, you get like the whole region, right? If you beat like one little group here, the Oritani, you get one tiny little area that the Oritani had, right? You've still got to go fight 20 more different battles. And so even if you can be effective, one, you run into the problem that they don't want to fight. Two, when they do fight, you only get a little small area. Three, it's all mountainous and you get people kind of coming down from the mountains to just bother you the whole time. And it really becomes kind of a difficult thing to pick off all of these different tribes in northern Italy and in Spain. And what Jorge's saying, yeah, this is like this is similar in Germany, modern day Germany, like what the Romans called Germania. Similar there too, right? It's not just like one group of people called the Germans. There's a ton of different tribes there, and you run into the exact same problem. Now, Rome tries a couple different strategies here. That guy Cato, the guy who always says Carthago delenda est, he's in Spain for a while. He actually fixes some of the problems. Some of the problems is that Rome was trying to extract too much tribute, and that would piss off the tribes, and then they would rebel. Cato was pretty good at dealing with some of those things. Then he went on to do something else, go visit Carthage, and they put this guy Lucullus in his place. Lucullus was a jerk, right? So what Lucullus does is he basically brings these tribes to the bargaining table, and he's like, let's come up with a truce, and we'll come up with a plan. And then once they go there to form a treaty, he kills them all, right? He kills the leaders and then kills their troops. And this just pisses everybody off even further. And so that's part of the problem too, is that it was difficult to get a consistent set of kind of governors, right, in these regions to deal with the tribes. Okay, so that's kind of a bit of the story in the East, right? Rome's successful and gets areas in different ways and incorporates them in different ways, but in large part because they can fight giant battles. In the West, it's a little bit more difficult because it's all these different little tribes who don't play war the way Rome wants to play war. Okay, so this is what we're looking at before the Third Punic War. Right, so before the Third Punic War, we're looking like that. After, the Third Punic War, well, okay, there's before. Why do I have all this again? Oh, okay. Anyway, let's start here. Sometimes slides just magically appear in the slide deck. Let's move on. Okay, so here is the kind of visual culmination of our story, right? We've got Rome in 264 BC right here. They are the most powerful people in Italy, right? And by 133, right, that's the kind of date that we're looking at here. So 130 years, they are able to turn that into owning all this, right? They have now got regions, provinces in Western Asia Minor, in Greece, Italy, Sicily, Africa, Spain, some parts of Gaul on the kind of close side of the Alps, Sardinia, Corsica. Over the course of 130 years, right, Rome has gone from the power in the peninsula to the dominant power in the Mediterranean. And some people are still holding out, right? There's still the Seleucids over here who are kind of client kings and allies, but they haven't formally been incorporated. The Ptolemies have been doing a great job in Egypt. They're still holding strong. But you can kind of see the way the wind is blowing on this one. Okay, so what are some of the effects of this expansion? One is that Rome changes its style of agriculture. In the early days of the Roman Republic, remember that good old guy Cincinnatus? He's off on his farm. He's plowing. Is this how you plow? Whatever he's doing. He's got his oxen and he's plowing his farm. Now, after this, they changed to a new style of agriculture based on latifundia, in the singular latifundium. And this is kind of almost like more like a plantation style farm, really large in scale, right? This is no longer a family farm. This is a huge thing where you are using slave labor that has been brought in by Rome's success in all these wars, right? So the more they're winning a battle, the more slaves that are flowing into Rome, they're going to work on these agricultural latifundia. And then what ends up happening is that these plantation kind of style latifundia grow and grow and grow. And the kind of family farmer gets pushed out, right? So they get pushed out there. And as a result, the family farmers who get pushed out, they move to the cities, right? So the cities are growing. Urbanization is growing. We've got different kinds of, this is a picture of Pompeii here. I don't know why these things are labeled with snacks. Snacks would have gone there. Maybe put some wine or some food in the jars here. But cities are growing. But that also kind of means unemployment is growing, right? You got people without jobs moving into the cities. That can cause problems. We've got new kind of social organizations, right? So remember when we talked about the patricians and the plebeians earlier on? Now we've got different groups. Now the patricians and plebs almost have all the same rights at this point in time. The plebs have been pretty successful in gaining more rights. Instead, there's a new division, right? It's hard a little bit to see here, and we'll talk more about them in the lectures to come. But we've got the populares, the people who fight for the regular people, and we've got the optimates. They are the best, right? It translates as the best people in Rome. They're frequently the richest people in Rome. So it's kind of the divide is still there between rich and poor, between the haves and the have-nots. But instead of being patricians and plebs, it's now the populares and the optimates. We see politics getting more and more competitive, all right? So Rome is growing in terms of the area that it has, right? But the number of offices hasn't been expanding very much, right? And so you get more and more people competing, right, as the population grows for the same number of political offices. And then one of the other kind of outcomes of this is that the magistrates are getting very rich by incorporating these provinces, right? So their power is growing when they get the office, there's more competition for the office, and once you get it, you get very, very wealthy. And we can start to think about how that might become problematic. And we've seen the rise of ultra-powerful individuals. So we've got this guy Scipio Africanus here, right? He's throwing triumphs for himself in the aftermath of Zama. He's adding names to him, right? He's Scipio the Conqueror of Africa. He's made proconsul, even though he wasn't consul. Prior to that, that was not something that was able to happen. And people, again, are getting rich and wealthy through the expansion of Roman power. And then finally, one of the effects here is that Roman and Greek culture is intermingling, right? So Rome, when they were dealing with Carthage in the west, right, they're going into a lot of areas in Spain and in northern Italy where it's small tribal cultures, where they weren't particularly highly socially developed, right, in terms of monumental architecture or art or writing or things like that. Once they start dealing with these Hellenistic kingdoms, they come into a really weird situation, right? They go into Athens and all these different Pergamon, right? And they're like, these places are amazing, right? The art is incredible. The architecture is incredible. The literature is incredible. And you start to see Rome kind of adopting some of the characteristics of this kind of Eastern Greek part of the world. And Rome's got this weird kind of thing where it's becoming clear that militarily they're dominant, but culturally, right, in terms of art or literature or architecture, they're coming up a little bit short, right? And so they start kind of integrating these kind of Greek styles into the Roman world. Something we might call the Great Cultural Synthesis. So let's go ahead and do our attendance for today. So the attendance color for today is tan. Go ahead and go to quiz number 26, March 29th, and select tan for today. I'll give you a minute or two to do that. And then we will finish today by talking about this very interesting guy, Tiberius Gracchus. All right, so let's go ahead. Yeah, let's go ahead and we will talk about Tiberius Gracchus for the last few minutes here. Okay, so in 133 BC, right? That is a good question, Hunter. How about, you know what? Maybe on Wednesday I'll talk a little bit about Heracles. This is something I developed for the mythology class, where obviously it's like much more relevant to that. Maybe I should have different colors of Julius Caesar or something for this class, but we'll talk more about that. I want to talk a little bit about Tiberius Gracchus today. So Rome is at its peak, right? We just saw Rome expanding all over the place there, right? They are very, very successful. But we see individuals kind of competing for power and becoming more and more powerful and becoming richer and richer. And this is starting to become a little problematic. Remember, the whole idea of the Republic is that no individual can become too powerful. And we're starting to see the seeds of that occurring. In addition, we see people losing their land, right? Because these farms are getting bigger and bigger and taking over little family farms. They're moving to the cities. They don't own land in the cities. They're like renting buildings. And that's a problem for the army. And it's a problem for the army because one of the requirements for joining the Roman army is you have to have land. Enter this dude, Tiberius Gracchus, the tribune of the plebs, right? So the fighter for the plebs. And what he comes up with is a new kind of piece of legislation. It's land redistribution legislation, which doesn't sound very exciting, but he says, let's take kind of some public land and chop it up and kind of, instead of having these huge plots, redistribute it to some regular people, right? So that they can have land so they can join the army. Now, you can think of what the rich people thought of this, and they were like, absolutely not. And you can think about what the poor people thought about this. And they're like, this is awesome. And here's what Tiberius does. Remember early on when I talked about how the Senate was an advisory committee. And by tradition, you ran your laws by the Senate before taking them to a vote. Tiberius kind of looks at the Constitution and he's like, it doesn't say anywhere that we have to do that. I'm taking this bill straight to the people. And so he is the first guy to take this bill, right? That's very, very popular for the regular people, taking it straight to the regular people and bypassing the Senate. Now, the other tribune, right, is kind of more of a richer guy. He tries to block it. Tiberius gets him thrown out and removed. There's this commission formed with his younger brother Gaius. We'll talk about him on Wednesday. The law passes by a huge margin, but the Senate gives them very, very little funding to actually carry any of it out. So they can't actually do what they want, even though the law passes by a landslide because it was taken straight to the people. Now, Tiberius wants to use the money that they just got. Remember, Pergamon donated their whole city-state, right? The whole like kind of kingdom to Rome. He wants to use the money from that to fund this thing. But people start saying like, oh, you want to just take this whole kingdom and use that money for your own good? Like, what are you, a king? And that kind of accusation starts getting thrown around to bad effect. And then Tiberius wants to do another weird thing. In addition to bypassing the Senate, and wanting to use the Pergamene treasury, he wants to run for another term. And so he does, but the mobs block the election, and in the aftermath, the Senate and the mobs on behalf of the Senate beat poor old Tiberius Gracchus to death with a broken up bench. So the guy gets beaten to death while trying to run for the tribunate a second time. And here's the question, here's what part of what you're going to be writing about for this week. Kind of, sort of. But what do we make of this guy, right? Is Tiberius, is he fighting for the people? Is he a hero of the people, right? Trying to take this land, give it out to more people, help out the regular person? Or has he just come up with a new way to take a kind of relatively low office and elevate it for his own personal gain, right? Has he found a way to take the power of the regular people to elevate himself, right? In terms of prestige and money and power. And so that's an interesting question, one I want you to think about for the next couple days. I will see you back here on Wednesday. Have a great couple days, and I will see you then. All right, everybody. Have a good one. Go watch the Arizona Wildcats game tonight.